Good evening, sir.
Good evening. How are you?
Good, sir.
Good. What we'll do is we'll hold on a couple of more minutes and make sure that no one else shows up, okay? And then if not, if in a couple of minutes they don't, we'll get started and we can always repeat ourselves if we need to.
Yes, sir.
Okay, good. I'll give you access to my screen while I'm sitting here reading emails. And I am going to record this session and I'll upload it to the classroom, assuming other people don't show up. There were a number that said they'd be here, so that's why I'm trying to give them a little bit more time.
Yes, sir. I understand. I'm actually logged in on my phone. I'm going to try and do it from my computer.
Okay.
That way I have a little bit bigger screen.
All right. Not a problem.
You know how government computers are, though. They can be a little finicky.
Yeah, good luck.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go ahead and get started. And at least nothing else, I can answer your questions, and I can sit here for a few minutes to see if anybody shows up late, rather than hold you up.
Yep.
Okay,
Sounds
so
good.
why don't you obviously, I'm assuming that you're here primarily because of the wanted to get clarity as far as the stakeholder issue that everybody is struggling with. And if that's not your issue, why don't you ask me the questions you may have first, so I can make sure I carry those.
Okay. The first question I had was I took your feedback on the
Mhm.
stakeholders, identified a few people in
Mhm.
my last paper,
Right,
i.e. the DO, the taxpayer, the employees of Lockheed Martin,
right.
and also the shareholders themselves.
And in your paper, because I mean, I've got a lot of papers, so I apologize. I don't remember the exact wording. In your paper, did you specifically say that that the key stakeholder groups are, and then list them?
No, I did not.
Okay, what needs to happen to do it effectively is, and it really should have been in week one when the problem statement was originally defined. Uh,
Okay.
and what you would normally say is you would start in the very beginning of the paper to say here's the nature of the problem and the stakeholder groups that are impacted most significantly by this problem are
I
ownership.
gotcha.
Ownership. Now, stakeholder groups. One of the things that people get confused about in the papers is a lot of people are trying to group stakeholders into one single group and then write their paper about that one group.
Okay.
That isn't the case. And that's unfortunately something that I see very often with people that are trying to grasp this concept that are in the military and have not worked in a civilian environment. But in civilian environments, there are a number of influential groups that have an impact on the performance of the company. Good examples would be shareholders, the people that own the
Yeah.
stock, the board of directors, the executive leadership, president, CEO, vice presidents, middle management, supervisory lower management, the workforce themselves. If you have a union, the union. If you're in an industry that's heavily regulated by the government, it might be the government departments. Then it's going to be
Okay.
your customers. It might be your suppliers, and it might be your bankers, the people that you owe money to. Those,
Right.
those those would be representatives of stakeholders. Now, I don't expect students to write a paper that covers all those vast groups because it would obviously your paper would end up being 30, 40 pages long. What I'm looking to do is for the students to say, given all of the nature of who the stakeholders are, here are the 3 or 4 key ones that are engaged in this problem. Ideally, ones that are coming from different perspectives. Okay, once you've done that in your original paper along with the problem statement, then for the rest of the course, every single week you're writing on a slightly different part of the company and a slightly different part of the problem. So in that week, if you're talking about pick a topic, it really doesn't matter which one it is, but what you would say is you'd say, okay, and based on this week's topic, this is how it would impact the company. Here's how these major stockholder or stakeholder groups are going to react to this situation. As you're doing your analytics, you would be talking about things like, well, the shareholders are going to be concerned about XYZ as it relates to this problem. And they're going to want to see this kind of action. The leadership's going to see this kind of thing. And then employees want to see this. And then what's going to happen is you're then going to, after you do your analytics, you're going to come up with a proposed action or solution to the problem. When you do that, then again, you want to go back and you want to say, uh, this solution is not going to be all things to all people, but it's the right decision for this organization. Leadership's going to buy in because it meets their expectations. Customers are going to buy in because we're delivering what the customers are looking for, this, and this. The union isn't going to like it because we're going to be asking for this. And then you show what the response is going to be. Then the final part of the paper is you saying, based on the recommendation, based on all these factors and how all these groups are seeing the situation, here's the recommendation to leadership on how to sell the change and minimize the resistance to that change.
Right.
And then you would show, while we can't satisfy the union, if we communicate, if we show them that it's going to retain jobs, that we're going to not be cutting jobs, and in fact, the profit levels are going to go up, we anticipate we'll be able to negotiate a higher bonus structure, whatever you come up with. And what you're trying to do at the end of the day is you're trying to come up with a recommendation for leadership that's going to fix the problem you've directed, and then you want to help them understand to implement that recommendation. What should they anticipate are going to be the reaction of the various groups,
Okay.
and what they could do to offset the negative responses they might anticipate from that. And
Okay. So
that's what you're trying to grasp by all this.
okay. So since I kind of vaguely introduced the the stakeholders in the week 3
Mm-hmm.
paper,
Right.
uh, can I interject them based off of how you stated, the key stakeholders in the introduction of this one because
Yes.
it'll tie to last week's paper.
What I would suggest you do going forward is
Hmm.
toward the beginning of the paper, just simply state something very simplistic that says, and the following are the stakeholder groups that will be addressed in this research project, and then just go on to do your paper that way.
I got you.
What's going to happen is at the end of the course, which is about week 6 and 7, you're going to take all these different papers you've written and you're going to merge them into one paper.
Okay.
And you're going to then have to look and see, make sure you have to resolve any conflicts. Maybe you've changed your mind over the 5 or 6 weeks that you've been working on it. You're going to have to make sure that you don't repeat yourself over and over again through the paper. So what you're doing right now is, imagine you're working on chapters of a book.
Yes.
And now you're going to put all those chapters together and you got to make sure they flow. So that little introductory comment that you put on your paper for the next week, that resolves for me that you know what we're talking about. And then when you write your paper for that week, make sure you go back and address each of those stakeholders
Okay.
and talk about what it means to them and why this week's topic is critical or not critical, or they won't care because this doesn't impact them. And then just do that going forward. Don't try and correct where you're at already with the first three papers. Just go forward with four, and then know that when you get to week 6 and 7, and you're gonna write that, you're gonna merge that final paper. You can take that introductory comment and you can bounce it back to the first paper, to the
Right.
introductory, and you can incorporate it there. But remember, you're going to have to go back into papers 2 and 3 and make sure that you incorporate the stakeholders into those papers as well.
Yeah, I've got all the papers saved, and
Hmm.
I've already started doing that. You know, I realized at first I was like, well, okay, I get it. I need to add the stakeholders. And then when I did this week, I was like, well, I guess they are kind of vague. But
Yeah.
I've already started to merge the
Hmm.
beginnings
Right.
together. So that's a great point. I'll blast that out in like, the first 1 or 2 pages about the stakeholders.
Exactly. And then just keep them through. Now, remember, in an APA formatted paper, you can have sections with subtitles. So you could theoretically introduce your problem and and what all the problem is and who the stakeholders are. And then as you're moving through the paper, you could if you're talking, for example, about I don't know, pick any one of the topics, but you're talking about the analytics of it. You could have in there a section that talks about the impact on the stakeholders, and then have subsections for each stakeholder and how that impacts them, and then move on to the next topic and do the same thing. So you could, if you want to keep it separated, you could do something like that.
Okay.
Uh, the the key is what I suggest you consider doing if you have the time, so that you don't get overwhelmed in the last week or so. Is when you have a few minutes, start merging the first three papers or four papers together, and start working on getting them so they flow like they were written at one time, and
Right.
they don't contradict each other. If you could get that done and get your stakeholders melded into them, then when you write weeks 5 and 6, or 4, 5, and 6, if you do it sooner than later, you'll have that done. So in your head, you'll be able to say, "Oh, okay, now I need to explain this part as it pertains to what I've already said about stakeholders."
Right.
If you wait until the very end to do it, then you're going to be going back and rewriting everything because you've not paid attention to it. And I keep having to take points off because you're not addressing the issue. And that's the other thing. Keep in mind, and I've said this a number of times to everybody. Not I may not have said it to you personally. The grading rubric is the same every week.
Right.
So print it out, sit it next to you when you're writing your paper, and just check it off as you cover each of these segments. If you do that, and I can see that you've addressed those segments, you'll get full points, or at least you'll get most of the points. It's
Okay.
people are just ignoring it. For example, that's what's been a little frustrating for me. I keep talking about stakeholders, and people are just ignoring it, which means I can't give them any of those points.
Right.
It's got to be specifically addressed if it's in the grading rubric. So that and the thing to keep in mind, that the purpose of this paper at the end of the day is to teach you as a future manager in a company, that if your leadership was to say, we have an issue, tell us what to do, this is designed to help you understand how you would present to them a recommendation. They don't want to just hear do this. They want to hear why they should do it, and they want to hear what's the risk associated with that, and what impact and who's going to fight it, and who's going to be in favor of it, and what can we do to offset the negative images or impact that people may have.
Right. I
Uh,
think I got.
okay,
Yep.
it's really not a hard project. The problem, and I tried having one of these sessions in week 1, but everybody was just getting started, and we only had one person show up for it as well. But you can see this is something that's frustrating myself and a lot of people, and yet you're the only one here. Now, granted,
I'm with.
the time may be an issue, and I am recording this, and it'll be stuck on in the classroom.
Okay. Yeah, like I said, when it comes down to it, the final paper is for the stakeholders themselves. I mean,
Hmm.
they're the They're the ones that have the buy-in.
Right.
And if you have buy-in, you have to get return on investment.
Exactly. Now, the one other thing that you'll want to look at, and you can do it in the final paper when you write the final paper. Although again, there's points on for it in each week, so you want to do some of it, and that's to remember that they want you to pull in the management theory that you've been learning throughout the degree. And what they mean by that is when you make a statement, for example, if you said something to the effect of management cares about human resource issues because, after all, people are the foundation of the company. Well, then you would want, that's a very valid statement. It's appropriate, but put a footnote on there or put a reference on there, a citation, and then use one of your references from one of your courses that talks about the importance of taking care of people. They want to see you pull in the material you've learned through all the degrees. That's what that first bullet in the grading rubric's about. They want you to reference the material you've seen in other courses that are talking about leadership and management in particular.
Okay.
All right. So don't just focus on subject specific. Okay.
Right.
And remember that theoretically, in a scholarly work, at least 50% of the references should be scholarly, not government or company oriented.
Right.
I'm not a hard fast on that, but I am looking to see people at least try to get some scholarly sources in there.
Okay.
All right. Any other questions
Yep.
that I didn't answer for you, or that you?
No, sir. I think I've got it.
Okay. I will. And like I said, you're free to go. Then I'll sit here for another 15, 20 minutes, see if anybody else shows up late. I will be posting this in the classroom. There's another meeting tomorrow, our normal weekly meeting during the day, and I'll be there in case people want to hear it then too.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Have a great evening, and thank you for being here.
You too.
Good night.
Night.
So while I'm sitting here in the event that any other students may show up, for those of you that are observing this video as it goes forward, I wanted to reaffirm this statement that I had put in the classroom for the feedback in week 3, which is attempting to help you understand this concept of a stakeholder. As I shared previously, stakeholder groups vary between organizations. You can see here the list I've provided. There can be a number of groups such as owners, stakeholders, stockholders, senior leadership, middle management, employees, customers, vendors, government, and many others. In some large corporations, there could be 20 or 30 different stakeholder groups. For the purposes of our paper for this course, I'm looking to at least see 3 to 4 stakeholder groups in your paper so that you can show that you understand the concepts and that you understand the importance of addressing the needs of these varying groups. As you research through your topics each week, then you're going to notice, or you should notice, that the wants, needs, and desires of each of these stakeholder groups are going to be different. The customer does not have the same needs and expectations of your employees or the union or the vendors or executive management. And so you need to address those. Your solution is not going to be equally accepted by all people in all stakeholders. So one of the things management expects to see from you in your analytics of this program is how will each of these stakeholders react differently to your proposal, and is there a way to communicate your proposal to them in such a way that you can improve their willingness to accept the outcome? And then when you make your recommendation on how to implement the proposal, part of that needs to be how you're going to address each of these stakeholders to optimize the return to the company from your behavior, from your change. Leadership will expect to hear from you specifically how your recommendation should be implemented to optimize their opportunity to satisfy the various groups. This can be very challenging when you're dealing in a union environment because often the needs of the company are in direct opposition to the needs of the union representation. And so they can make a difference as well. So that's one of the things that I'm really not seeing in a lot of the papers. People are making the misconception that a stakeholder is a single group within a company, or it represents the majority of a company, that there's only one in a company or in an organization. There are always multiple ones in every type of organization, and depending on the complexity, even in a military command, there can be significant stakeholders with significant differences, and you need to address those. As I shared in our discussion just a moment ago, I'm not expecting you to go back and redo and resubmit your papers that you've previously submitted. I'm suggesting that you capitalize and develop this concept of a stakeholder, use it as part of your introductory comments for week 4's paper, and share who they are. And then as you proceed through the topics for 4 and 5 and 6, proceed to start addressing the stakeholders' needs. And then when you merge the papers together in week 6 and 7 and go back to the beginning, you're going to have to modify those papers to ensure the stakeholder involvement is all the way through the scope of the paper. Normally, you would define the stakeholders in that first paper as part of your introductory comments and your statement of what the problem statement was, because you would show who the stakeholders are. You would then show what your problem statement is, and then part of the definition and explanation of your problem statement would be to explain how each of those stakeholder groups sees the problem and where the differences might lie. So those are the type of things we're expecting to see in it. It's a relatively simple process once you understand what a stakeholder is and who they are. And when you start looking at issues and trying to determine the differences, the nuanced differences. For example, if a problem has to do with quality of manufacturing a product, the needs of the customer are not necessarily going to be the same as that of senior management or the hourly employee. But yet, when you make the changes, you could end up with a situation where hourly employees are being asked to do more, senior management's being asked to spend more money to resolve that problem, and customers are expecting you to resolve it yesterday, not in 6 weeks, if that's how long it's going to take you. So those are some of the kind of issues you might have to address if that was the nature of one of your problems. This is also part of the structure that we use in research, this kind of management research, to address issues such as risk. So if the problem you have is creating an excessive amount of risk within your organization, then one of the ways you overcome risk is you break it up into smaller components and you look for actions and behavior that will allow you to address that risk and reduce the risk factors in those smaller components, because they become easier to work with if they're not so massive. So part of that risk avoidance planning strategy is to also look and see how do we avoid the stakeholders groups not supporting the necessary activities. So these are just a few of the observations you might see. As we're progressing through here, let's look at the announcements. And as you know, I try to have a weekly office hour each week, either live or or available on the telephone. This week, week 4, that office hour is noon to 1 on Eastern time, or 11 to 12 Central time, Thursday, tomorrow. I will plan to be here, and if anyone sees this and raises other questions, you can feel free to pop in at that session and talk to me at that time, and we can have another discussion relative to this topic. Hopefully, this information has been useful. And if you have other questions, I would encourage you to email or post them in the classroom so that others can see it as well. And hopefully, we can get beyond this. The other issue is just continue to remain to be on focus as far as APA formatting, proper citation and references. At this point in the program, you should know how to cite and you should know how to write references in APA format. You also need to avoid the use of first person. We're writing in third person only. You're observing the situation, not participating in it from the standpoint of writing the paper. And then finally, you need to, as I was explaining in our earlier conversation, you need to pull into your paper the theory that you've learned throughout the program, so that when you start talking about what management should do and the way management should behave and the way people should behave within the company, look for those scholarly resources that you've used in your studies to support those statements. Remember, in scholarly writing, none of us are qualified to give an opinion or to make a statement in fact without having a citation from a scholarly source that supports or defends our conclusions and statements. We are not considered to be experts, and therefore, in a scholarly research paper, anytime we make a statement of fact or offer data or offer conclusions, there should be a citation reference from a scholarly source that supports it. And that's what they're looking for in that first bullet of the grading rubric, to be able to prove that you've learned the degree information that's in the program. And then finally, uh, we need to make sure that you understand that at this point in time, this is the final course. This is the capstone of the program. So we're looking for you to show that you can come up with logical, well thought out, and concise statements and recommendations, and using those citations to support and defend your positions. I'll be available if anyone needs to talk with me. My phone number is right here on the screen, and you can call me. I prefer to be called between 9 and 3 Eastern Standard Time, Monday through Friday, if possible. That just makes sure I'm at the phone. I wish you the best. Wish more had been able to attend this evening, but at least I think we got a good amount of information put out. Good night.